in here last hour. But we're glad that those of you that came anyway for this next presentation. Let me just introduce the topic and our speakers. This is the completion of Utah's first freight plan. Our speakers today are Daniel Kuhn, the Railroad and Freight Planner for the state of Utah, and Kelly Lunn with Federal Highway Administration, and then myself, Vern Kiesler with Interplan. So we'll be going ahead and giving a PowerPoint and talking a little bit about the freight plan requirements, and we'll go from there. And we'll start with Kelly.
Okay, thanks, Vern. One thing I want to start off with is thanking Dan and Vern. They've done an excellent job with this freight plan. I don't know, two other guys that have more compassion than those two, and really appreciate their effort. They've done a great job. So it wasn't an easy thing to do. For us, there wasn't a lot of incentive to give the state to move forward and do a plan, but I appreciate their efforts in doing that. So see, you got a list. That's something else. Okay, back on 2012, there was a MAP 21 was signed. That's moving ahead for progress in the 21st century. And it was a 2-year bill. And normally we try to have 4 to 6 year bills. So this was, the time frame of this one was really hard for us to get all the regulations and stuff out. There is a new bill in progress right now. It's called the DRIVE Act. And that stands for Developing a Reliable, Innovative Vision for the Economy Act. So it's kind of a mouthful, but something you can learn ahead. Does anybody remember the prior bill towards MAP 21? In the audience? Anybody? Any takers? Safety letter, that's right. Good. You've earned your keep. So with this new bill, they're trying to get freight up to a level where they can start funding it more. In the past with MAP 21, there wasn't a lot of encouragement to states other than a match, a higher increase in match. And I'll talk about that in one of the next slides. So as a part of MAP 21, there's some sections we pulled out that were freight-related sections, and there's 1,118. And the key word here is encourage. We encourage each state to develop a comprehensive state plan that would, outline immediate and long-range plans. So, and then in 1117, they encourage each state to also establish a state of freight advisory committee. We never had one here in the past, and this has been a really good thing. I think this really helped with our freight plan and moving it forward too. That group is called Utah Freight Mobility Group. And we plan on expanding that in the future, add more freight industry into that fold. So we're moving forward, which is a great thing in this area. Section 1116, this is the match value for projects. If the project's on the interstate, there's a 95% match for those projects and a 90% for any other project. So Utah's sliding scale is currently 93.23% because of our federal lands in the state. So the state gets a higher match here in Utah. So as you can see, there's not a lot of incentive for the state to go forward and do a freight plan and move forward with that. So the other part of this bill was saying if you want a freight project delivered, then you need to have a state freight plan. So that's kind of the kicker right there. So each state needs to develop a state freight plan before we can do that. And on the bottom there's the interim guidance that the comments went out on October 15th, 2012. So some of the goals that we looked at for freight plans was to improve the freight transportation system for economic efficiency and productivity and competitiveness. Wanted to reduce congestion for freight, improve safety and security and the resilience of the freight transportation system. They added resilience in here because they felt that this area needed to have more of a capacity to recover quickly from difficulties or toughness. Because this industry, sometimes, as we know, in the freight industry, we've had, ups and downs with fuel prices and all that kind of stuff. So they want to add resiliency to it to help, get through those tough times and tough periods. So we also want to improve the state of good repair, and advanced technology, performance management, innovation, competition, and accountability in the transportation system. Reduce adverse environmental community impacts, and also we wanted to try to get all states to get freight plans together. We wanted to build a national freight plan. And the only way we could really do that is get freight plans from the states together and review them and see what the nation needs as a whole. I think this is a good step. We always think in terms of our state, but freight's not that way. And as Dan will tell you, it's a national effort, and it's an international effort, including Canada, like his previous presentation. So freight's wider than a state, and we want to make sure that when we get that stuff, we can evaluate it and be able to give the best guidance out to those folks. So, state freight plan contents. So on here we have, we want to make sure they had all these items kind of in the state freight plans. These should have goals that we could go by and concert with the other states, and economic context, policies, strategies, and institutions, and take a look at the state freight transportation assets nationwide, and well, obviously in our state as we produced our state freight plan. Conditions of performance is a key to having good roadways for the system. Make sure we have a freight forecast. We got to look at trends, needs, and issues, because each state operates differently, as we know, and some states are doing better in the freight, different areas, like trucking is better in some states than it is in others, and rail. So we want to make sure we capture those strengths and problems in each state so we can help out there. And make sure we have a state's decision-making process and state's freight improvement strategy and implementation plan. So those are some of the items we really want to look at to make sure that each state has those areas in there. So when we evaluate, we want them to have them consistent so we can pull them together and look at a national system. And with that, I'm going to turn my time over to Vern or Dan. You're welcome.
Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you, Kelly. This slide here that Kelly just went over are the 11 chapters that are suggested for state freight plans. And Dan and I are going to tag team the rest of the presentation. We're going to start off right now with a map of Utah and how it compares in the western United States. We'll have Dan visit with that, and then we'll just continue forth.
Now, when you look at this map, and some of you who've been to previous presentations have seen versions of this map, these are all the highway routes. Interstate highways are blue. The red highways are state routes or U.S. national highways like US 4089 that have a major impact on freight movement in Utah. Now, the rhetorical question here for the all-expense-paid trip to Milford, Utah is, why would I be showing Highway 99 from Sacramento to Bakersfield and State Route 58, Bakersfield over Tehachapi Pass to Barstow? Well, in fact, I just noticed something, Vern. We have relocated Barstow to San Bernardino. You know, California might declare war on us for that, but I like both places. What can I say? I'm probably the only person alive that likes Barstow, but it's a train place, so that's why I like it. Anyway, Think about all the produce out of the San Joaquin Valley in California, and agricultural support equipment, fertilizer, things like that. And a lot of that moves through Utah, and the only way to get there around the southern Sierra Nevada mountains, which are right here, is to either go 80 and down or 15 and 58 to 99. In fact, freight movement, normally you have a dividing line at Fresno, California. If it's Fresno North, it goes to 80. If it's Fresno South, it goes like that. So that's just the point. I put that in to help people understand that while we're a state DOT, I have never looked at transportation infrastructure operations with any artificial man-made boundaries given to it. You cannot do that with freight. And you really shouldn't do it with a lot of other things, motorists and things like that. But freight doesn't care where the state line is. Those trucks are moving across multiple states, and that's why it's so important for different states to work together to address common issues. We don't really have freight mobility problems in Utah. We've addressed all of them, other than a few local streets like 5600 West out on the west side of Salt Lake. But the problems on 15 are Vegas down to Barstow, down to San Bernardino. Or on I-80, they're from Reno over Donner Pass to Sacramento. So delays, congestion, inadequate infrastructure there, or weather-related problems like across Wyoming on I-80, they can have an effect on whether a company chooses to locate here, stay here, or how freight is moved not only to Utah, but through Utah, or what route it chooses to take. I hope that kind of makes sense to everybody so you understand the bigger picture. But this shows Utah's place in America's transportation network in the West. And you can see we really are the crossroads of the West. That's why freight's so important to Utah. We have the highest percentage of truck traffic at 23% of all 50 states. The national average is 12. Now, are there more trucks in California or Illinois? Yes, but they're not a higher percentage of total traffic on those states' highways. We have the highest here. Now, I'll let Vern go ahead, go talk about this a little bit, about the different supply chains, commodities, things like that, and I'll chime in certain parts of it.
I think it's important. A lot of people don't think, oh, it's freight, it's not sexy. Well, let me tell you, Dan thinks freight is sexy, and so do I. When you start talking about employment, and you start talking about, take a look at the pipeline industry. While not a lot of people are employed in the pipeline industry in the state of Utah, look at their average annual salary. And then look at warehousing and aviation and pipeline and compare those. And there's a heck of a lot of jobs that are provided in the transportation sector here in the state of Utah.
Let me add something to that. You know, computer and information technology jobs, that's what everybody considers sexy. Stop and think about this for a minute. What do computers do? They work with data, okay? They don't grow food. They do not transport materials. They do not provide drinking water. They move data. Information technology is important, but a country and a people operate on what they produce, what they consume, what they import. So realize that the people who run transportation, they're basically the circulatory system for the human body that is the United States, just like our counterparts in Canada and in other countries are for their respective nations. Like I always used to like to tell people here, working in a warehouse may not be the ultimate dream of somebody, but those people make good money. They have benefits, and they're the ones at the local Walmart buying stuff on Saturdays and keeping the economy going. We need to look at the blue-collar type jobs for what they actually are and how they benefit us. And they don't go away at the drop of a hat like IT jobs do so often. Go ahead.
When we talk supply chains, every business really relies upon supply chains. The important commodities in the state of Utah are listed there, coal being one, although we recognize that coal is starting to decrease with the amount of regulations placed on the power plants. Copper, crude oil, petroleum products, and salt, all important commodities in the state of Utah. And you can see what modes there that they're transported by and how the industry is affected. Now, Dan will talk a little bit about the primary freight network, but what we've done is we've identified all the primary freight network highways in the state of Utah. In fact, Dan started doing this before we started working together back in '05. So we have listed all the primary freight networks. We've worked cooperatively with Federal Highway Administration to identify those. We've reviewed the national freight network and provided a lot of input on their original draft. And you can see that rural Utah, well, over 2,000 miles, and they're divided into 4 categories. Our interstate routes, which is no surprise, and then we have critical rural and critical urban freight routes. In addition, we have energy routes. Dan, you want to point out the 4 energy routes?
Oh, I guess I will since I'm here today. The green lines right here, these are coal routes. This is crude oil in here. Indian Canyon, hardly a truck-suitable road if you've ever been on it, particularly in the wintertime. But there's dozens and dozens of big crude oil tankers. That's the only way they can get from the Uinta Basin to the rail terminals down here in the Price, Wellington, and Helper area. So they're going over Indian Canyon. Now, when I first looked at this, see, I came to UDOT as the railroad planner from the railroad industry in 1999. And after being there about 6 months, I said, well, you know, you don't own any railroads, but you have a rail planner. You have trucks coming out the yin-yang, but you don't have a freight planner. So I became the freight planner in 2002. And okay, trucks are going to put more wear and tear on the roads than any other vehicle, right? I mean, you know, trucks are necessary, but they're big. Infrastructure wears out. So if we're going to have, I knew we had a lot of trucks. I didn't have data or numbers about it. Okay, which roads, once again, a rhetorical question, which roads do we need to focus on? The ones that haul the trucks that have the biggest effect on our economy. We need to make sure those roads are suitable for trucks, that the infrastructure is built to the right standards for trucks, that we have passing lanes. There were passing lanes and climbing lanes was the #1 need in rural Utah, identified by the trucking industry in my meetings with the Utah Trucking Association back in 2003 to 2005, and that's where I focused my attention. Another need, how many of you have ever driven Black Ridge coming up out of St. George and Hurricane? Man, a lot of people haven't been to St. George in this place. Well, it used to be 2 lanes, 75 miles an hour going uphill. I just loved driving up there. I'd be going 75, I'd come around a bend, and I'd come across what is rhetorically known as the Southern Utah Drag Race. That's a 21-mile-an-hour truck passing a 20-mile-an-hour truck, and I've got about 500 feet to get down to 20 miles an hour. That was the first road in Utah to get a climbing lane. That's when you had a 3rd lane on an interstate highway. And so these were the needs that by identifying where the trucks are, then we know where to focus money to make sure that road infrastructure is holding up and it's doing what it's supposed to do. And what happens when you design roads for trucks and when you focus your infrastructure funds on routes that carry trucks? They work great for automobiles and RVs, but if you design roads only for automobiles and RVs, quite often they don't work well for trucks, and you've just wasted your money. So I wanted to make sure before I went any further with freight in Utah, where's the freight running and where do we need to focus our efforts? And that's where the primary freight network came from.
And this map is quite a fluid map. Every year it changes a little bit. When we meet with UDOT regions and with the transportation industry, they change routes every once in a while. And so we have to adapt to that. Why this map is important is that it has a prioritization score. Projects that are on a primary freight network highway have a prioritization score that UDOT uses to prioritize its projects. Now, I do want to point out level of service. I won't spend a lot of time on this. The one map on the left would be the level of service of our primary freight network highways without a no build. No, I believe it's existing. And then 2040 is the long-range plan there on the right-hand side. So we did look at level of service. We used the Utah Straight Travel Demand Model to be able to calculate out level of service and see where our problems were on the primary freight network. In our MPOs, they've been excellent partners with Dan and I, and there's a couple in the audience today, Mag and Dixie. I see both of them represented here. And we went around and visited with each one of those and helped identify the primary freight network within their boundaries. So here's the Cache MPO. You can see they have a 35 miles is all critical urban freight routes within the Cache MPO boundary. Moving into the Dixie MPO, they have 28 miles of interstate and 26 miles of critical urban freight routes. So I-15 and then other routes down there, SR9. Moving to MAG, you have 44 miles of interstate highways there and 12 miles of critical urban freight routes. And notice the photos there. There's a lot of freight all over the state. Stouffer's down there, and then Longview Fiber are just a couple of examples of primary freight facilities within Mountain Land Association of Governments jurisdiction in Utah County. Finally, moving to Wasatch Front Regional Council, with a lot of interstates combining here and coming together as a crossroads. We have 114 miles of interstates, 30 miles of critical urban freight routes, and as Dan stated, 5600 West, and is one of those in badly need of expansion and reconstruction. When we start talking about level 1 and level 2 roadways, based upon the information I heard from Carlos at his opening conference address, hopefully level 2 highways disappear, right? With that funding. And so it's going to be interesting to see what happens to the condition of our level 1s and level 2s if we just combine it all and able to complete the projects that are needed on these level 2s. You get down there to Bluff and Aneth and southeastern Utah in the Four Corners area. If you've been down there and you take a look at the road, it's been what do they call that when they crack sealed so many times it almost looks like new pavement down there. That's how bad it is. Well, when you're talking about freight plan, a lot of people think, oh, well, we got to need infrastructure for trucks. And so we went through and we worked with the regions and identified all the chain-up areas within the state of Utah. And we need to sign those. They need to be lit so truck drivers can see and get safely off the road, put their chains on or take their chains off depending on the situation. Dan, any comment on the chains?
No, just a matter of, you go out to California, and admittedly I-80 over Donner Pass is a lot busier than, say, US 6 going over Soldier Summit. But when a loaded truck can't pull off into an unpaved shoulder. If it's wet, they'll sink in, they may turn over, they have to have pavement. One, do we want them putting their chains on in an unlighted location on the main highway, or do we want to provide those spots where we know we have a need for trucks to put chains on to make it up a grade? This is a part of the infrastructure, and it's not high-cost infrastructure that does amazing things for freight mobility, efficiency, and safety in being able to move trucks safely and move the automobiles and the RVs safely, who may also use the same facility to chain up if necessary. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's an asset, and it shows that we're freight friendly in the state of Utah when we provide these types of facilities, and we probably need more. In addition to the chain-up areas, we looked at our runaway escape ramps and inventoried all those locations within the state. A lot of times you don't think about that. Not only are they for trucks, but occasionally you'll see an RV that has lost their brakes, and I've never seen a car in one of these, but we've certainly seen an RV and trucks in these emergency escape routes. And they're important too. Some of these slopes that you're seeing, 8 and 10% grades coming down 191.
Into vernal.
Yeah, into vernal, and that's where this particular photo is from. You certainly need these emergency escape ramps.
Now, truck parking is something near and dear to Vern and I. We received 2 federal grants to research truck parking over the last, 5 years. We've done extensive research. We have a website that has all the findings from it. It's something that the federal government is now starting to look at on a national level. But we have a real shortage of truck parking. You know, the federal government passes hours of service laws, so trucker has to stop at 11 hours or 14 hours, depending on what he's been doing or she's been doing, and yet there's nowhere for them to safely park. And so the most recent data, which is now about 3 years old, that we did, shows that every night in southern Utah, we fall almost 500 spaces short along I-15 south of Provo. Here in the Salt Lake Valley, it's several hundred short every night. And that's growing as truck freight grows. So that's why you end up seeing trucks parked on ramps, parked on shoulders, on city streets. If you ever want to have a really exciting Monday morning, and I do this about once a month, I go out at about 3 o'clock in the morning on Monday. And I go to all the truck stops in the Salt Lake Valley and down Old 21st South Street. You wouldn't believe how many trucks are parked down there. Costco warehouse over by R.C. Willey on 5600 West. I've seen as many as 85 trucks lined up for the 4:30 a.m. opening time of that warehouse. That's one warehouse out of hundreds that are out on the northwest side of Salt Lake City. So we have an issue. We're a freight center. We have our crossroads of freight movement, and we have one of the largest distribution warehousing centers in the western United States. So truck parking is a huge issue for the economy, for efficient freight movement on our highways, and for Utah. And we were one of the states that took the lead looking at that.
I do not accompany Dan at 3 a.m. in the morning, though. I will tell you, though, as we reached out to the trucking industry and interviewed over 400 truck drivers with our first grant, it was a $500,000 grant to do truck parking through Jason's Law, through the Federal Highway Administration pilot project that they did. We learned a great deal, and they said we need some oversized truck parking as well. So we thought, okay, let's identify those areas where we need truck parking. We found them, went back to FHWA and says, we need truck parking here. And they go, we're ready to give you a grant to build some more. So they gave us a $1.1 million grant to build 24 additional spaces down at Lump Park Rest Area. We did 10 on each side with 2 oversized truck parking spaces on each side. And we learned a great deal. I go by and I can't drive by a rest area without looking to see how many trucks are sitting over there, and especially in the oversized truck parking area.
I've had a terrible impact on him.
Freight railroads. We'll switch to railroads now instead of highways. There are 8 freight railroads in the state of Utah. They're listed there. We have a couple of Class 1s, the Union Pacific, BNSF Railway. Those are our 2 largest. And then we have the Utah Railway. The Utah Railway is a regional railroad, but it's also an operating agent for BNSF Railway here in the state. You can see our short lines as well, and you can see the number of track miles and whether that trackage is owned or whether it's trackage rights. So let's start off with our largest railroad, the Union Pacific. With that, you'll see the supply chains. Each one, coal is no surprise. Lots of aggregate, right? Dan has always stated that railroads haul low-value products, bulk commodities, long distances, right? And so you take a look at that and you see a lot of crude, a lot of coal, and a lot of aggregate.
Plus salt. We run a whole trainload of salt out of here every day. If you drive I-80 West, which I'll be doing in about 30 minutes, you will see all these salt evaporators out there west of the lake and out by Wendover. This is not human consumption salt, it's industrial application salt like road salt and whatnot. But they're hauled in covered hopper cars, 100 tons to a car. You can always tell which hopper cars carry the salt. They're the ones that are the most rusted. So watch for them as you go out to Wendover and out that way on I-80. The refineries are shown here. These are major transportation facilities for trucks, rail cars, and our pipeline network, which is extensive in the state of Utah. And while, yes, there's a lot of bulk commodities carried, the Union Pacific, which is our dominant railroad here in the state, operates a considerable amount of intermodal through Utah and to and from our Salt Lake City Intermodal Center out on the west side. And I think we'll talk about that a little bit later. This shows the major rail yards and terminals here in the Salt Lake Valley, or in the whole state of Utah. SLCIT, the intermodal terminal, is right there, out by 5600 West, the International Center, and the airport. I think I can. This shows another photograph of it. Here's your map showing where it is. There's 80, there's the airport interchange, 201, California Avenue, and there's SLCIT right there. That's the single most important freight mobility project in Utah, is the complete reconstruction of 5600 West. There are more trucks on 5600 West than there are on many rural interstate highways in the United States, and it's a 2-lane rural road with no shoulders and a rail crossing at the entrance to that terminal. So the largest count of delayed trucks and cars I've made when a very long UP train was departing SLCIT was on January 4th of 2012. It was a 241 car train, and it delayed 987 vehicles, 90 of which were long haul trucks. Now, if you're delayed 25 minutes and you have 11 hours to work, that has an impact on your productivity and how far you're going to get with that truck. Another terminal that not many people know about, because it's kind of out of sight, it's between 21st South, 33rd South on the west side of I-15, is Roper Yard. Roper is the general freight terminal. The local trains from Wendover and out at Grantsville that bring the salt in are made up into big trains here. This is where all the new automobiles for Utah and other parts of the Mountain West are brought in. The only new automobiles that come in from another terminal is if you buy a new car in St. George and it came from the Pacific Rim. It's a Korean car, Chinese, a Japanese. It is shipped by train from the ports of LA and Long Beach to Las Vegas, where they have a terminal for their own needs, and they'll truck them to Vegas. Now, if you get a European or American-made car, it comes in by rail to Salt Lake City's Roper Yard, and the trucks transport the cars down as far as Cedar City. They go up to Boise, they go up into Wyoming. It serves a very large area, as does the intermodal terminal as well. Now, we mentioned BNSF comes through here. The Union Pacific was always Utah's largest railroad. It was Utah's first railroad, too, back in 1869. But when Union Pacific took over the competitive Southern Pacific, the federal government required that the remaining other major Class I road in the West be given trackage rights from Denver through Utah to Stockton, California, to provide quote-unquote competition. And that trackage rights comes into the state of Utah on the former Rio Grande line. Hang on, hit the wrong button. Right here, coming in through Green River, up through Helper, Soldier Summit. Provo is the main operating terminal for BNSF, whose local operator is Utah Railway over Union Pacific tracks, and the trains continue up on the UP to Roper Yard and then west along the Salt Flats on I-80 headed to California. Now, earlier this week, I actually saw a BNSF train. They were doing track work out here in eastern Nevada, so the UP ran the BNSF train across the Great Salt Lake. It's UP's railroad. The BNSF is a tenant. They'll run them wherever they need to get them. If they're doing work, they'll divert them onto another route. That's only the second time since 1996 that I've seen that happen. Next is Utah, this is BNSF's yards, which are at Helper, Utah, and down in Provo, and those are basically Utah Railway facilities. Now, turning over to pipelines. Vern, was there any more you wanted to say about railroads?
No, we're good.
Okay, pipelines. You don't think about pipelines much. Do you know that the pipelines in Utah keep over 2,200 trucks a day off our roads? So they're an important mover. They're the number 3 tonnage mover of freight in the state. They're only slightly behind railroads. Trucks are by far the biggest user and biggest hauler of freight in the state of Utah. Then railroads and then pipelines right behind them. Our pipeline network consists of a slurry pipeline that carries a semi-liquid leachate material of phosphate from that big mine on 191 just north of Vernal. They pump it 8,000 feet up over the Uinta Mountains to a phosphate processing plant on the Union Pacific at Rock Springs, where the finished product is shipped out by rail. But most of our pipelines aren't slurry lines. That slurry line alone keeps 400 trucks a day off 191 over the Uintas. If you're familiar with that road, imagine adding 400 big trucks a day of bulk material to that very steep, twisty 2-lane road. The other pipelines are either finished petroleum product pipelines. They call them hazardous liquid pipelines, but the industry calls them something different. That's gasoline, diesel fuel, jet fuel, things like that going out to be used. You have crude oil pipelines, which bring in the crude oil to refineries to be processed. Our crude oil lines come from as far away as Edmonton, Alberta. They come from Colorado. They come from the Uinta Basin, although the wax crude does not go well on a pipeline. Most of that's trucked. They come from Wyoming and Montana as well. Finished petroleum product pipelines go to Las Vegas. They go to Burley, Idaho, and Pocatello, Boise, the Tri-Cities in eastern Washington, all the way to Fairchild Air Force Base at Spokane. If you buy a tank of fuel anywhere between here, up I-84 to Boise, to Pasco, Kennewick, Richland, Spokane, most of that fuel, if not all of it, was refined at our 5 refineries in the Salt Lake City to Woods Cross corridor. So if we have an earthquake here and those refineries are taken out, it's going to have a tremendous impact on east-west transportation across much of the United States. The other type of pipelines, so we have a map of gas.
Yep.
That's next. Now this is the refineries right here. See the pipelines, you've got railroads, you've got the refineries here. They're all interlinked by pipeline. And then down here by the Chevron refinery right here, see where it says Chevron Pipeline Terminal, that's where the pipelines come in or go out from, other than Pioneer Pipeline. Let's see.
You gotta go back.
There we go. Pioneer Pipeline. I keep hitting the wrong button for the laser. It's not really marked well. Pioneer Pipeline is a refined fuel pipeline that comes from the big Sinclair refinery up by Rawlins. If you buy Sinclair gas anywhere in Utah, it is refined in Sinclair, Wyoming, piped to North Salt Lake, trucked out to wherever it's going to go from there. So realize there's a lot of hidden infrastructure with pipelines that most of us never think about because it's out of sight, out of mind. Now, crude oil, that's another matter. There are actually 6 facilities, only 3 of which are really 4 of which are still fully operational today, that take Utah crude oil from the Uinta Basin, a little bit from down by Richfield, and ship it out of state to refineries either in California, which loves our wax crude, because Northern and Southern California refineries have to refine different grades of fuel during the year for air quality issues in California. They've just found about 3 years ago that Utah's wax crude is the best crude oil to use to make the winter blend fuel for California, to meet the California Air Resources Board regulations. It's all in the composition of the fuel. Fuel is unique. Every fuel from every oil field has a different chemical makeup. It's just like magma out of volcanoes. They're all different at every volcano. So we load it on trains. We have to truck it from the basin or from Richfield. The biggest one's Price River Terminal at Wellington, Savage Terminal west of Wellington, AES at near Helper, and then Salt Lake Garfield and Western, the Crescent Point terminals out by the Salt Lake Airport. Very little goes through Ogden or through Midvale now. This is actually the Savage Terminal. That's the big coal silo, which is rapidly losing its coal commodity, and they're switching over to transferring crude oil from tanker truck via these portable transfer rigs over to tank cars. The good thing about our crude oil, it's not as explosive as the Bakken crude, so you don't have the risk of shipping it by rail or by truck that you do with crude from North Dakota or other areas. Now, natural gas pipelines, natural gas is a commodity that in my work as freight planner, I rarely deal with. It's a commodity that traditionally travels by pipeline. You don't see natural gas in a ship or a tank truck except in unusual circumstances. So I've essentially ignored that aspect. But the federal government wanted us to at least include where the natural gas transmission lines are located. And this shows the construction 3 years ago of the Ruby Pipeline, a 36-inch high-pressure natural gas line taking natural gas from Wyoming to California. Try to build a pipeline in California is like trying to build a steel mill in California. It's not going to happen. So they got around this by building this high-pressure pipeline because, see, liquids like crude oil and diesel fuel can't be compressed, but gas can be compressed. So they built the pipeline, came out of the Evanston area, went up here near, was it Monte Cristo? And this is just north of, what's the little town east of Brigham City? Manaway. Having a senior moment here. This is showing it being put in the ground. And it goes out north of the lake, across northern Nevada, and it goes into the state of Oregon at a place called Malin, near Klamath Falls. There it hooks up with a pipeline system that was built in the 60s coming from British Columbia and Alberta to the San Francisco Bay Area. They put the Wyoming gas in with the Canadian gas, and it all goes to California by upping the pressure. And they got around the environmental issues in California by doing that. So it's kind of an interesting industry. Now, air cargo is the smallest. It's probably the most visible because we use FedEx and UPS, but it's like 0.1% of total freight tonnage in the state of Utah. I mean, you're hauling lightweight items by air. You don't haul coal by air unless you're studying the Berlin airlift in 1948, where we kept Berlin supplied by coal and World War II vintage propeller planes. Interesting story behind that, but it's not fuel efficient. Remember, a jet burns 125 times more fuel to move 1 ton, 1 mile than a train does. So you don't see it by air. But this shows our air cargo operators. Of course, FedEx is the biggest, followed by UPS. But Delta and Southwest and the other airlines do still have a fairly respectable air cargo business operating in the holes of their passenger jets. Salt Lake City's the air cargo hub. You see the other airports that carry air cargo listed here. Pat, I hope that's accurate. You can always correct us before we go to final print on this. But Salt Lake City is either 25th or 26th largest air cargo airport in America. We always seem to play tag with San Juan, Puerto Rico, whether we're in the top 25 or not. But we're a regional hub. We'll never be anything more than that. Heaven knows we have great long runways, wonderful weather for aviation. We've got a lot of land by the airport, but why do you think it is that Utah or California or Oregon or wherever, because places like Boise and Klamath Falls have tried to compete in becoming a major air cargo hub for the whole continent? Why would we in the West not get that? Because most of the air cargo operates in the central and eastern time zones. Where are the people? Where is the business? Why would you fly a parcel from here to, or say from Miami to Salt Lake City to fly it back to Atlanta? Makes more sense to fly what freight there is from Salt Lake City to Memphis, which is UPS, or to Nashville, which is FedEx. Or no, that's the other way around. FedEx is in Memphis and UPS is in Nashville, and then fly it back to the West versus the other way around. So that's why air cargo operations in the United States, the big hubs are in the Eastern or Central time zone. And you know where the number 3 air cargo hub is in the United States? Anchorage, Alaska. That's the 3rd busiest air cargo airport in the world because that's where the cargo jets stop to refuel on their way to and from Asia, Europe, over the poles, over to the Pacific Rim. You'll see more 747s at the Anchorage airport than any other airport in the United States, including New York. So a little extra trivia for you there. Now, I'll turn it back to Vern here. This is about freight centers. We need to know where the freight is being generated, either coming in or going out, and its relationship and proximity to our primary freight network highways.
It's important for us to be able to see and identify the primary freight centers, here, this particular one across the state, and be able to identify the intermodal connectors that connect our primary freight network with our primary freight centers. So we've identified all the primary freight centers by UDOT region, Region 1, now Region 2, down in the Wasatch Front area.
Yes, I have to point this out. My poor wife is sitting in the back. She goes out with me on some of these adventures, and she is a dispatcher for Malt-O-Meal cereal here, so she's involved in the freight industry. Yep, so there's Teresa getting the mail for Malt-O-Meal out on the west side of Salt Lake City. Had to add that in just for her. She's sitting back in the back corner, so.
Going to Region 3, you'll see our freight centers there, and we've been able to go through and visit with each region to help identify these primary freight centers. Region 4, again, across the southern half of the state. Now, with that, this goes to the statistical side of the freight plan, and this could be the boring side, but we wanted to point out to you, using Freight Analysis Framework, it's a Federal Highway Administration data set that they use. In fact, we've been using FAF for a number of years now. We've used FAF 3. Last week, they came out and started releasing parts of FAF 4. And so we will be looking at that in the future too to see what new data it provides. But here you can see total freight movements using all modes by value and weight, value in the blue, weight in the red, 1997 all the way through 2012. Notice the 2007 to 2012, not as huge a jump as 97 and 2002 and 2002 to 07. Here's the different modes of how our freight is moved. Again, using those same 4 data set years, 97, 02, 07, and 2012, by truck, by rail, by pipeline, and by air. Notice our air cargo. As fuel gets more expensive, I think our air cargo has gone down.
Is that?
The car commodities weighs less, an iPhone is lower.
Yeah. It's, these are somewhat relative. You need to look at the numbers on the right side to fully understand whether we're talking, millions of tons or thousands of pounds, depending on what it is. Go ahead.
Looking at our mode share, we wanted to show our mode share, and this is no surprise when Dan said 23% of all our traffic in the state of Utah is truck traffic. Trucks are what moves the freight in the state of Utah. There's no doubt about that.
The red.
It's the red number and then, or the red color, and then also you can see what in comparison between rail and pipeline and our other modes. Trading partners. I think this is always interesting to take a look at our top 5 trading partners other than ourselves, okay, which is our #1 trading partner, like any other state, would be themselves. But after that, you start taking a look at the largest one, and notice California is our #1 trading partner in all those 4 data set years. Another consistent has been Idaho. And then why would Florida, who is our number 2 trading partner in 1997, drop off the map in 02, 07, and 2012?
Think about it.
Any
What
ideas?
did Utah ship to Florida? That's right. Thiokol rocket booster sections for the space shuttle. High cost, fairly high tonnage. A little side trivia on that. How many of you are familiar with Weber Canyon? There's a tunnel up in Weber Canyon, the Sheep's Head Rock Tunnel on the Union Pacific. That determined the size of the space shuttle boosters because they had to go through that. And so it was all those were built out there at Thiokol by Promontory, where the Golden Spike was driven, shipped by flatbed crawler vehicle down to the rail terminal at Corinne, and by rail all the way to the Kennedy Space Center.
So interesting little tidbit about our trading partners. Top 5 trading partners by weight, that was by, the first one I think was by value, and now you can take a look at by weight. Tennessee Tennessee is an anomaly there. Anybody know why Tennessee was our trading partner and ranked so high in 1997? Tell them, Dan.
How many of you have heard of the Tennessee Valley Authority? It was a government program, to build dams and power plants starting in the Great Depression. TVA is a large operator of coal-fired power plants, and they were importing high-grade Utah coal for certain power plants to be blended with lower-grade Midwest, Appalachian, and Wyoming coal to increase the efficiency of power plants. That's why Missouri shows up in there too. Missouri Public Service at Sibley, Missouri, east of Kansas City, does still occasionally burn Utah coal to blend it with the lower-grade, cheaper coal from other areas.
Great. Value commodities appear in all 4 data set years. Base metals, electronics, you can see manufactured products. We do a lot of manufacturing, motorized vehicles, other foodstuffs, and pharmaceuticals. And so it's interesting to note, the value is on the left there. We do the same thing for weight, coal, not a surprise, coal not elsewhere classified, crude, petroleum, gasoline, non-mineral products, and waste scrap. And so it's important for us to understand what we produce and what we ship and how to retain these businesses, these companies here in the state of Utah. Here's our 2040. This is what FAF is predicting for our value and in this particular value and weight from 2012 to 2040. And so what can we expect? Well, it looks like trucks not going anywhere, right? Unless we start to see some interesting things. But, you know, what are we going to be looking at in the future? Carlos talked about in his address these autonomous vehicles and being able to use Uber instead of the driver pulling up, just the car pulls up and you go where you want to go. Are we going to have our own truck bypasses? Are we going to have autonomous trucks driving in a line by 2040? We don't know. But it's things that we should certainly prepare for and certainly take a look at. And then, for whatever reason, look at our air cargo. Will continue to increase. And we saw a great presentation yesterday that Pat's group did on the Salt Lake City International Airport. Any other comments, Dan,
Nope.
on this one? Taking a look at our trading partners by value and by weight as we look toward the future. You certainly can see that Utah is going to continue to trade with itself. That's not a big deal. And we're going to continue to trade with ourselves more in the future. Is that because transportation costs go up? Is that because we're able to diversify and do more in the state of Utah? These are all questions that we have. We don't have answers for them. We just ask the questions.
But a couple of things to think about. As Utah's population goes up, the number of people wanting dairy products out of the Cache Valley will go up. As Utah's population increases, there's going to be more aggregate from our local quarries being transported within the state to construction sites. So you can see how you can become your own main trading partner. Most of Utah coal is consumed in Utah. It does not go to other states like Wyoming coal does, for example. So we are our own best trading partner here, and that only gets better as the population increases.
Texas mainly oil?
In what context?
Well, I was just saying the percent, the amount going to Texas.
We
Yeah,
don't.
got value.
That's value. We only ship a minor amount of oil to Texas. It's usually other commodities from here.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, Roland, what that particular commodity is, doesn't it?
We're still
What's it going to
researching
be
a
in
lot of this.
24, where we're 2040, what Texas is consuming from the state of Utah? Take a look at our mode share. Again, trucks not going anywhere. In fact, it's predicted that trucks get a larger percentage of the mode share in the future. And so you take a look at rail, rail's going to increase, and I think intermodal is doing that. Intermodalism is what's driving the force behind the increase in our 2040 mode share. Anything else, Dan, on that?
No.
You take a look at what type of commodities are being shipped from, to, and within the state. And here's a list of the commodities and the percentages. It's probably a little hard to read from where you're at, but see, Precision Instruments from Utah. So that's kind of interesting that a lot of the precision instruments that we manufacture here in the state are shipped from the state to the state. Again, precision instruments and machinery within the state of Utah. We start taking a look at the weight of commodities, and so a lot of times you look at value and weight is the two most common factors that you look at in our freight statistics, and you can see the different commodities that are shipped by weight, and you can see it's a lot of aggregate, but look at what a lot of crude as well, a lot of coal.
Weight and value have a tremendous impact on which mode you choose to ship it. Also, which mode you choose to ship it will determine whether the private sector, i.e. the railroads and pipelines, are bearing the cost of that infrastructure, or if it goes by truck, that's being paid for by the taxpayers. So it's important. That's why the government and FAF looks at all these things, because that will help you understand where you are in terms of the total impact of freight movement in a given area of the country.
We're continuing looking at expanding our Freight Mobility Group, which is our freight advisory council here in the state of Utah. We meet with them about twice, 3 times a year. We have a meeting that we're going to be doing fairly quickly, and we're probably doing some tour and some education with our Freight Mobility Group. And then finally, we have 173 freight projects identified, and these have freight components to them, totaling $5.7 billion in our freight plan. I think that's pretty awesome. 21 of all those projects are found in 21 of the 29 counties. 69 of those are climbing lanes, and a majority of those are found in Ann's region and Region 4. So we got lots of interchange improvements, operational improvements, new roads, 5600 West, #1 freight project. And with that, we appreciate your time. We'll got about 30 seconds or a minute to entertain any comments or questions you may have for Dan, Kelly, or myself.
But one thing I'd like to do before we totally conclude is Terry Smith, raise your hand. The Utah Trucking Association, which Terry represents, has been a tremendous help to myself and to Vern in getting input from truck drivers, from truck shippers, since trucking is our dominant freight mode. And so they have been a huge help and continue to be in learning all of this and finding out where we need the passing lanes and where we need to change the turning radius at an intersection. So I'd like to recognize him. And then who's here from our regions? Anyone from the
Ogden's
regions?
here.
Okay. I want to recognize the regions, particularly Region 4, because they have done so much to help implement the improvements that we identify as needed. So let's give them a hand, and Terry a hand as well. And we'll be here for a few minutes. I think our time is just about up. Anyone have any quick questions? Yes?
You think we should have a slide for electricity?
That's not one of the federally identified freight issues. It's a fascinating subject. I've researched it for years, but we tried to stick with what the federal government was looking for in a freight plan. We kept it just to that. In the future, we may branch out into other aspects of business and industry that are affected by or have an impact on freight movement. But right now, we don't. Any other questions? Thank you all very much. Enjoy the end of the conference and have a good week.